I was a cop for over 2 decades. I saw it all. Bodies lying on the cold ground, muffled screams on crackling radios, lies spilling from mouths to deceive. I thought nothing would ever shake me, but that leaf destroyed me in a way that not even years on streets, not even the bullets I nearly got, could do. It's been weeks, maybe months, since I've properly. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night with my heart racing, the sheets soaked in sweat, and the feeling that someone is me from the bedroom door. But when I look, there's nothing, just silence. A dense silence that seems to contain something, as if the air is waiting for me to remember or confess. I try to move on with my life. I sit down to have rummaged through the drawers, lean against the window, but it all comes back. It always comes back. Because there's one image that let me go. That list, the cold printed letters in alphabetical order, and there in the middle, her name. Ever since, there's been something wrong with time. The days drag on as if they're mocking me. I find myself looking at my phone, waiting for a call. Anything. But what I received that night, it was more than a warning. It was a direct message. It was personal. It's strange. Because my police wanted to investigate, to act, to cross-reference data, but something inside me, something more primitive, just wanted to run, to hide her from the world, as if I knew deep down that nothing I did would change what was already in motion. The worst part is that the memory come to me whole. It comes in bits and pieces, the strong smell of damp paper, the muffled sound of the police van, the creak of the chair when I stood up abruptly. And then there's that feeling in my stomach, as if the floor cracking beneath my feet. I don't know if I'm ready to remember, but I know I can't forget anymore. It all started one hot morning. I received a report that at first glance seemed like just another piece of unimportant paperwork. But there was something wrong with the way at the time, the unmarked envelope, and especially with what was inside it. Can you imagine what it must like for a father to see his own daughter's name on a list where no one should be? I tried to ignore it. It was a mistake, but something inside me already knew. What came next would be much worse, and it was much worse. Before continuing, leave like and subscribe to the channel, because what I'm going to tell you now won't leave your head, and maybe not yours either. The sound of the whistling still echoes in my head when I think of her. It was always like that. Late afternoon, the sun setting behind the trees on other side of the lake, and I was there in the kitchen, trying to make dinner seem like something more than an obligation. Clara would come running from the bedroom, barefoot and with her hair tied up laughing in the way that only a child with a light soul can laugh. She liked to help me cut the vegetables, if I only let her handle the ones that were already cut. She said we were the best duo in town, and I believed her. Not because it was true, but I needed it to be. I was the town's police officer, the only one with more than 10 years in the uniform. The one knew by name, the one who held the police car's microphone with a firm voice even when his hand was shaking inside. But no one knew how many I told myself that everything was under control, just so I wouldn't fall. No one knew that every time Clara left for school, waved at me absent-mindedly with her lunchbox swinging, I would stand at the door for a few seconds to make sure the world outside was still safe enough for her. The city itself was too small for anyone to truly hide. Everyone knew everyone else. There was no anonymity, only silence. The kind of silence that carries exchanged glances at the bakery, suppressed whispers in the line at the post office. Even though I wore the uniform with pride, knew that silence hid more than we wanted to admit. Things that no one had the courage to say out, things that deep down everyone would rather forget. When Clara was born, I had been in the job for over 2 years. Her mother, Sophia, was a teacher at a state school. She was intelligent, calm, and always had that look in eyes that seemed to see beyond words. She died on a Saturday, cardiac arrest, sudden. She was washing dishes and fell. On duty. I was notified by the radio. No one is ever prepared to hear their own name on the emergency channel. From that day on, Clara became my everything revolved around her. My schedule, my fears, my silent promises. I did the best I could to give her a full childhood, even a world that had already taken half of it away from her right at the beginning. I became a functional man. I took care of the house, made snacks, her homework, read her bedtime stories. Sometimes I would lie down on the couch after she fell asleep and just stare at the ceiling, trying to who I was before all of this. She was curious. She asked about my work, about what I saw on the streets. I filtered it. I told her that people got lost and that my job was to find them. It was the closest I could get to the truth without poisoning her childhood. Once, asked me why I looked sad when I came home from work. I said it was tiredness. She believed me, or pretended to believe me, like children do when that adults can't explain certain things. At work, I manage as best I can. My colleagues respect me, but they avoid getting close. I think it's because I've never been the same since Sophia died. Some say I've become colder, more direct. Maybe there, but inside the ice wasn't coldness. It was just fear. Fear that if I stopped to feel anything, everything would fall apart at once. So stayed focused. I responded to incidents, filled out reports, did what was expected. A good cop, a strong man, a present father. The complete on the outside, but there were nights when everything slipped away. After Clara fell asleep and the house sank into that small town, my mind filled with noises that no one else could hear. The sound of distant sirens, dry crack of a gunshot that stayed in my memory, the muffled screams of someone I never saw again. And in the middle of it all, her breathing coming the bedroom, calm, deep. It was the only thing that anchored me. One time, she left me a note in my backpack without me knowing. Said, "Dad, you are my hero, even when you are sad." I read that in the parking lot of the police station inside the car, and I cried like a baby. It me in a strange way, beautiful and cruel at the same time, because then I understood the weight I was carrying, and how she, without knowing it, trying to hold me with those little girl hands. It's funny how we learn to hide the cracks. Every day, I put on my uniform, adjusted my holster, fixed hair in the hallway mirror, and pretended it was just another morning. The truth is that every day I hoped the world wouldn't decide to test me, because I knew there was little separating me from total collapse. And that thing had a name, and a smile, and 7 years of age. My house was modest but safe, an alarm system, cameras in every corner. Well defined, I needed that. I needed to feel like I was always one step ahead, which was absurd, of course. No parent is prepared to protect them from everything. We just try and pretend. And come on, even though I don't believe in anything anymore. Before going to sleep, I would walk past her bedroom door and listen to her breathing for a few seconds. That's all. Her breathing. As if that were enough that the world, no matter how twisted it was, could still be bearable. I remember one Friday morning when she asked me to take to school on my bike. I was late, tired, and had a sore back. But I looked at her face and couldn't say no. I grabbed the bike, put on my helmet, and we set off down the still, dewy street. It was one of the few I forgot everything. The city seemed different. Clara sang some made-up song, and I just pedaled slowly, as if every meter was of that day. When I dropped her off at the school gate, she turned around and said, "Promise you'll come back for me?" I laughed. Yes, she shook my hand, and off she went. Now I wonder why that question stuck in my memory. Maybe because, deep down, some part of me already knew life doesn't like easy promises, and that going back to look for someone can be the hardest thing in the world. The station back then was an old building, smelling of old paper and burnt coffee. Fluorescent lights buzzed all day long, and the files were never order. It was a functional chaos, like everything in a small town, but it was my station, my battlefield, where I was, where my pain could be useful, where my rigidity was a shield. No one there knew what I carried on my back. No one knew that I would go and sleep with the radio on, just so I wouldn't hear my own thoughts. At that time I felt exhausted, but it wasn't physical exhaustion. It was the other kind, the kind that settles in your bones and refuses to go away. The kind that in your ear when everything is silent. I lived between protocols, occurrences, signatures, and the irrational fear of losing the only who still made me wake up with some purpose. And it was in this state, half awake. Half an envelope with no return address appeared on my desk. There are things that, when you see them, seem wrong even on paper. As if the paper rejected the ink, as if that information shouldn't exist. That was the feeling I had when the report landed on my desk. A brown crumpled at the edges, with no stamp, no sender, no protocol. Just my name written in hurried handwriting at the top. It was early afternoon. Kind of slow afternoon when the police station seemed to breathe laziness. The radio was silent, and the only sound was the intern's computer clicking as he tried to close the week's bulletins. This just arrived. They left it at reception. It was urgent. That was all Martin said before heading into the next room. He spoke as if he were delivering a random message. But I could hear different tone in his voice, a slight discomfort, almost like someone relaying something they didn't quite understand. But them anyway. I picked up the envelope with my fingertips, instinctively as if I knew something was wrong. It wasn't heavy. It didn't even to contain much, but when I tore the seal, the air around me seemed to wither. There were 4 sheets inside. None of them had a heading. They were simple printouts, straight from Word probably. The first was a note with the title in all, Cases of Possible Threats to Specific Residents. The text said that anonymous reports had been received a supposed list of names connected to as yet unidentified but potentially dangerous events. It was vague, generic, one of those alerts that appear every now and then and lead nowhere. But the following sheets, the next few pages were lists, addresses, dates of birth, and a final handwritten column of what appeared to be notes, disjointed symbols, letters, numbers. There was no apparent to them. Some names were crossed out with a red marker, others circled. I began to scan them slowly, feeling the leather of the creak beneath my weight, every muscle in my body tensing with each line I read. The room got darker. I swear to God. The light, it was like something had turned off out there, like the world had held its breath with me. It was on the 3rd page, almost at the end. Among the names of people I knew by sight, old residents, downtown merchants, people I had stopped at checkpoints, was her name. Clara Martins of my heart skipped a beat. My throat went dry instantly. I had to blink several times to make sure I had read it correctly. Clara. It couldn't be right. I looked at the name again, 3 times. The address matched. The date of birth matched. There was no room for doubt. Her. I stood up so fast that the chair tipped over backwards. The noise caught Martin's attention, who peeked through the door. Is everything okay? I wanted to answer. I wanted to pretend it was just another stupid scare, a reflex from a bad reading. But I couldn't. I could stand still, with the paper shaking in my hand, blood dripping from my fingers. The noise of the ceiling fan sounded like a helicopter blade my head, my vision blurred. I don't know if it was from panic or from the sweat that ran my forehead and stung my eyes. For a moment I thought I was going to fall. Did you read this? My voice came out lower than I expected, almost hoarse. No, I just handed it over. Why? You're welcome. Go get some coffee. I'll take care of it. The lie came out automatically, like all the lies we learn to tell to protect the ones we love. I bent down, grabbed the chair, shaking hands, and forced myself to sit down. It took me several seconds to be able to breathe properly. My head was pounding. What of list was that? Who had made it? Why? Who would send me something like that? And what did the symbols mean? And why? Of all, there was my daughter's name on there. Panic wasn't the kind that makes you scream. It was the kind that freezes you. That makes you hear of saliva running down your throat like a drum. I started reviewing all the recent cases that could be linked to this. None have matched. There was no formal threat to the city, no gang activity, no accusations of a cult, nothing that would justify that prediction. That's what it was, right? A prediction. A threat disguised as a statistic, but not for me. For me, it was a sentence, a warning, or a trap. I put the in the drawer, locking it with the small key I rarely used. I left the room and went straight to the sergeant. I said I needed an hour. 2. I pretended to have a stomachache. He looked at me sideways, suspicious, but nodded. Go, but come back. There's a crash in the south this. I nodded without looking him in the eye. I walked down the hallway with my stomach turned. The ground seemed farther. The overhead lights flickered as if mocking my attempt to feign normality. I got into the car and turned the key in a hurry. Hand was still shaking. The city streets passed by the window in a blur. The square, Mr. Arlindo's bakery, the corner where Clara and I bought on Sundays. Everything seemed far away. At the school gate, I waited, 40 minutes early. I couldn't do else, just look at the blue iron gate and imagine that at that very moment, my daughter could be in the crosshairs of something I even understand, that someone, somewhere, had written her name on a list. As if her life were another line in some report. And it was there, sitting in the car, with the engine off and my hands on the steering wheel. The day began to form in my head. A question that would not leave me any time soon. Who else knew she was on that list? Have you ever felt like danger be right in your own routine, as if the worst was right where you thought it was safest? The first thing I did when I backed to the police station was open the list again, this time with the eyes of someone who was looking for something. That made sense. I forgot the protocol. I forgot the deadlines. I forgot that he's supposed to be helping with the raid in the South Zone. The only thing that mattered was understanding why my daughter's name was, and understanding who else might be in danger. I got the addresses of the names. They were all long-time residents, people who rarely appeared in the bulletins or appeared in strange, ambiguous without anything actually being resolved. I started cross-referencing the data, pulling up records, opening dusty folders that no one had in years, and that was when the coincidences began to scream. In the house of Donna Irene, a widow who barely got the couch, there was a report filed weeks ago, noises in the attic. According to her, she heard footsteps during the night, being dragged around, but when she went upstairs, everything was in its place. Her colleagues dismissed it as a hallucination of a lonely old woman. I have dismissed it too before, not now. That same week, Mr. Valdir, a former carpenter, reported to the control center that the security cameras in-house were turning off by themselves every morning, always between 2:47 and 2:53. At the exact time, technical support found no fault. He asked for the entire system to be replaced. They did. The new system also turned off. Always the same time, he gave up filming. And then came the case of the Nunez couple. They received a letter with no sender, a thick envelope, with written in code, a strange alphabet with symbols that looked like a mix of ancient Latin and Roman numerals. I thought it was a joke. Until the copy of the letter. When I touched the paper, I felt a chill that didn't come from the cold. Something there didn't add up. It was as the symbols carried something more than sound. It was as if they had weight, a kind of presence. I spent the night poring over the records. Went back to the station's archives, which were in the basement. The musty smell was so thick I could taste it. It was like a cellar of poorly kept folders were stacked in questionable order. Reports were rusty stapled, pages faded with age. It was there that the first link. In 2012, there was a series of unexplained disappearances, 4 in total, ordinary people. Nothing that could be linked to one another, at least at first glance. The last disappearance was the strangest. A young woman named Joanna Asuncao, nursing student. She disappeared from her own home, without any break-in, no sign of a struggle, no record of movement on the nearby streets. The only from the area who gave a formal statement was a woman named Sophia Martins. Sophia, my wife. Her name was there. It was written in firm script. The document described how she had reported strange lights the night before she disappeared, that she had heard sounds that didn't match he knew, that she had smelled a strong odor of burning iron coming from the street. The investigator in at the time dismissed the report as without probative value. He said the witness had seemed shaken, that she had probably gotten facts mixed up. My blood boiled. I knew Sophia. I knew how sensible she was, how level-headed, how lucid. And now, 12 later, our daughter's name was on a list, with other people who were receiving exactly the same signs that Sophia described back then. Something coming back, something that had never been resolved. And now I had no doubt Sophia saw something. She saw it and tried to warn us. But no listened, not even me. I went to her bedroom closet that same night. The house was silent and Clara was already asleep. The room still had that I had never touched, as if touching them would take away the little I had left of her. But I had to. I had to face it. At the of the closet, inside a cardboard box with a faded sticker that said school supplies, I found a notebook. It was hers. One of those with a cover, no identification. The first pages had loose notes, short texts, literary quotes, but in the middle of the notebook, they appeared. Drawings, diagrams, charts, phrases in languages she didn't speak, and then stories, like a secret diary. They come back in cycles. City doesn't notice, but they're close by. The blue light in the field, the voices from the wall. They're not the victims are chosen by default, but the pattern changes. I have to protect Clara. My hand was shaking so badly I nearly tore the page as I turned it. This wasn't a delusion. This was a real record, a warning, and it had been locked away for 12 years in a closet I passed every day. 12 years. The silence night seemed heavier. The wood of the house creaked differently. The wind didn't blow as it used to. It was as if now the house knew I knew, that I was breaking the invisible code that sustained that rotten balance. I didn't sleep, not for a second. I sat on the edge of the bed with the notebook on my lap and the gun on the nightstand. For the first time in years, I was truly afraid, really afraid. This was just the beginning. What if my daughter was the end? Have you ever felt like the deeper you dig, the more you feel like you shouldn't have? It took me 3 days to pluck up the courage to return to the house where I lived with Sophia. 3 days, the notebook I found in the closet open on my desk, as if the pages breathed on their own. I reread every note, every symbol, every she had made in a hurry, as if she had been racing against time when she wrote all that. And maybe she had. The sentences stuck in my head like come back in cycles. Victims are chosen by default. I need to protect Clara. It was all so jumbled up, like was trying to put together a jigsaw puzzle that had missing pieces, and it tore me apart inside. Because for years, I never imagined she was through anything like this. I thought her loss had been a sudden tragedy, a cruel twist of fate. But it felt like something else, like she'd left carrying a secret too heavy to share. That afternoon, I left Clara with my sister and went back to Old House. I still had the key, even though the place had been closed for years. The rust on the gate like a muffled scream, and the lock on the door was slow to turn. The smell hit me immediately. Dust, old wood, and something faint metallic odor in the background. The kind of smell you can't forget, but can't explain. Natural light filtered through the cracks, the threadbare curtains, casting slanting lines of dust suspended in the air. Every corner of the room frozen in time. The books still on the shelf, some crooked paintings on the walls, and the armchair where she used to read, Clara sleeping on her lap. It was as if no one had touched that place since the day everything stopped. And no one really had. I walked up the stairs slowly, as if something inside me already knew where to look. I went straight to her room, which was from the one we had stayed in together. After Clara was born, Sophia had turned the old office into her own space. She called it her refuge. I respected that. I never went there, not even after she left. I pushed the door open carefully. The air was cooler in the windows were closed, but even so, there was a slight movement in the air, as if some invisible current was passing the space. On the wall, notes hung with thumbtacks were still there, fragments of thoughts. Ideas, scribbled notebook paper. Some sentences crossed out, others circled so tightly that they almost ripped the paper. It was like being inside her, but not the mind I knew. This was another Sophia, one who struggled alone with something no one would believe. The cabinet at the corner was locked, and instinctively I knew it was there. I took the key from behind a book on the shelf. She had that habit, and it. Inside were folders, lots of folders, some labeled with names and dates, just with symbols. I pulled them out carefully. At the back of the shelf, lying between a thick biology textbook and a box of photographs, was the unlike the notebook I found at home. This one had a hard cover, covered in dark fabric, and had no identification. The clasp was magnetic, but become loose with age. When I opened it, the smell of paper hit me again. It was a dense smell, like a book that had been kept too long, or like a that should never have been read. The first pages were filled with dream records, repeated dreams. She always saw the same place, an open, a red sky, and distant figures watching her. Then she began to piece together stories. People who came to colleagues, neighbors, all with similar stories, noises in the night, lurking figures, disappearances, hallucinations, and always a feeling of being watched. But what really stopped me cold was the part where she started listing names. Names of people who, years later, appeared the report that landed on my desk. Some names were circled, others were underlined. Alongside them were notes that looked like code, and some exactly the same as the ones in the recent document. She knew. Somehow, she knew. I kept, and the more I read, the more I felt the weight of that silent pain. She mentioned that she had tried to alert the police, but they had her, that she felt that by talking too much, she was accelerating the process, that something or someone reacted whenever she tried to herself. And then came the personal stories, nightmares, memory blackouts. She felt watched inside her own home. She said that Clara, as a baby, reacted to dark corners with a kind of ancestral fear, as if she could perceive that adults could not see. On the last pages, the handwriting changes. It becomes more shaky, more urgent, and there. Like a final whisper written on the edge of the page was the sentence, "Protect our daughter. The next cycle has begun." I stood there, staring at words as if I were staring at a death sentence. The room seemed to darken again. The floor was unstable. The wood beneath my feet creaked a slow rhythm, as if something were moving beneath the surface. She knew. She tried to warn me, and I failed her. Was something coming, something that was coming back, and now Clara was marked. At first I thought it was paranoia. Sleeping badly, accumulated, all of that could mess with your head. But deep down, I knew I was past the point of pretending. It was just stress. Cameras around the house never failed. They always ran smoothly, 24 hours a day, but that night they started to flicker. First it was the camera in back, the one that looks out over the yard near the wall, black screen, then the one on the side, and then the one on the one by one, as if someone or something knew exactly where and when to cut off my view. I ran to the main monitor. I played backup of the last few hours. Nothing seemed wrong at first. Clara on the couch watching cartoons. I was in the kitchen, nervous, fiddling an empty glass. But then, in one of the frames, I saw it, a silhouette, static, behind the tree in front near the fence. It wasn't big, nor it was incorrect, as if the body wasn't quite aligned with the light around it. And the strangest thing, It seemed to be staring straight at even without a face. That alone was enough to make my spine shiver. I took a deep breath, went to Clara's room. She was already asleep, her arm thrown over the pillow, her hair stuck to her forehead. I stared at her for a while, too long. I knew I had to get her out of there. Sophia's diary wasn't symbolic. It was a warning, a plan, and I was late. I Clara up gently. She grumbled, not understanding, but looked into my eyes and felt something. Children feel. No explanation needed. I just told her we're going to visit Aunt Anna and that she needed to go now. She just nodded. While she was changing her clothes, I called Anna and her to meet her on the North Road. Don't ask, just go. That was all I could say. Within 15 minutes, Clara was sitting in the of my car, and I was driving with my eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. On the way, she held my hand across the front seat. Was shaking a little, but she wasn't crying. That hurt me more. A child who already understands when she has to be strong shouldn't. I handed Clara to Anna and asked them to leave the city. No GPS, no phone, no contact for at least 48 hours. I was going to solve it, or try. I home shortly before midnight. The street was deserted, as if someone had warned the neighbors not to go out. The streetlight on the corner flickered. The front door was ajar. I never left the door open. I cocked the gun. I entered silently. The interior of the seemed larger than it should have been. Time slowed. The air had a different weight. My footsteps sank into the floor, as if was pulling from below, and then I heard it, a whisper, faint, like the sound of a book being carefully turned. Walked toward the sound. It came from Sophia's room. The door, which had been locked, was now open. Inside, 7 people, standing in a circle. Dark, no faces visible. Rudimentary masks made of wood, some covered in symbols, the same ones from the diary. In the center, a mark on the floor. A maid of salt and earth. Inside, something that looked like a doll, but made from parts of objects from the house. A piece of Clara's blouse. A toy. A photo of us torn in half. My stomach turned. I raised the gun. "Who are you?" One of the hooded men stepped forward. His voice was hoarse. As he was speaking after years of silence, "We are the guardians of silence. And she was marked in the last cycle. You will not touch her. She been touched, as your wife has been, as others have been. We do not choose. We observe and record. The choice comes from elsewhere." Anger grew. Revolt tore me apart inside. Everything Sophia had tried to tell me, everything one believed, everything we ignored, was now before me, in flesh, mask, and ritual. This is crazy. Do you think you can play God with lives? We don't play. We keep silent. The cycle is the price. And your daughter is the echo left from last break. She needs to be delivered. I fired. The sound of the shot ricocheted off the walls like the speaking figure fell. The others didn't move. They didn't run. They didn't react. They there, motionless, watching. Then without any command, they turned and left, one by one, out the back door, down the hallway, out the open, as if nothing had happened, as if they knew that this confrontation didn't change anything, as if whatever needed to happen was still. I was left alone in the room, my body on the floor, the hot gun in my hand, and the salt still scattered on carpet. My breathing was labored. Cold sweat was running down my back. My entire body was with adrenaline, but my heart seemed to have stopped. I thought that was the end. But when I looked at the old mirror on the wall, I saw what shouldn't be there. The reflection wasn't just mine. I never thought that saving my own would cost me everything, but it did, and I paid without hesitation. After that night, after the confrontation with guardians, or whoever those people were, my life never went back to the way it was. Not that I expected it to. I knew, deep, that once I crossed that line, there would be no going back. But what I didn't imagine was the weight of what would happen afterward. The silence comes when the truth is spoken out loud, and no one wants to hear it. I took Clara far away, far away. We changed cities, states, routines. Changed my name. I started living as a shadow of myself, a man who had a uniform, a role, a purpose, and now only carries the wreckage of it all. I told her what happened that night. I just said that we needed to start over, that it was the best for both of us. She believed me, but deep down knows she carries something in her eyes that wasn't there before, a weight that no child should carry, even without having seen anything. She felt, when I returned to the city months later, it was like entering a place that had never belonged to me. The police station was already under Elsa's control. My name, dragged through the mud of internal reports, was circulated among whispers and poorly jokes. Psychological breakdown, they said. Emotional exhaustion, delusional conspiracies. I was even to undergo a psychiatric examination, and of course, everything was normal. No report explained what I had seen, no protocol for dealing with it. I lost my badge, my gun, my authority. I was dismissed the excuse of needing permanent leave due to emotional instability. In other words, a broken man who had seen too much. A nuisance was easier to silence than to listen to. I tried to fight. I tried to tell what had happened. I tried to hand over Sophia's notes, the camera footage, the report records with the names. Nothing was left, nothing remained. The files were gone, the images were corrupted. The turn to wind. It was as if everything had been erased by an invisible and efficient hand. Even the body of that man who had fallen in, the whatever it was gone. When I returned with backup, the room was clean, no marks, no salt. No, as if I had invented it all. As if I had been alone, and in a way, it was. The local press, always thirsty for new blood, made a point of reporting downfall. Veteran police officer removed due to mental imbalance. A dry, cold, cutting headline. I became the subject of glances at the grocery store, of whispers in the bank queue. The same faces that once trusted me now looked away. As if what had happened to me could leak out. But Clara was alive. She wakes up every morning. She says good morning to me with that smile she inherited from her mother. Sometimes she still cries at night. Nightmares. Nothing very clear. But she calls me, never for the light, always for my presence, and I'm there always. Even destroyed, I'm there. I started working as a night security in a warehouse miles away from where we used to live. It's a cold place, with not much movement, where no one more questions than necessary. That's how I like it now. No one recognizes me, no one questions me. Silence has become my shelter. A silence from the one the Guardians wanted to impose. Mine is the silence of someone who has seen too much and now chooses solitude as a shield. Now and then I think about Sophia, about the things she tried to say and I didn't want to hear, about the weight she carried alone while I continued, believe that the world was simple, that monsters wore masks and that all you needed was a badge fight evil. She tried to warn me, she tried to protect Clara, and even after death, I still have the diary, buried inside a metal box under the floor of the warehouse where I work. I've never opened it again. But I know every by heart, especially the last one, the one that wakes me up sometimes in the middle of the night, echoing like a desperate prayer, our daughter, the next cycle has begun, I achieved for now. But sometimes, when the night gets really quiet, when guardhouse camera blinks and comes back, when the radio crackles for no reason, I ask myself, is it really over? Do you think we can really overcome what we don't understand? Life had returned to a strange kind of normal, a quiet, fearful, almost normal. Clara went to school, I went to the night shift at the warehouse. The nights were long but empty, like a hallway where the light never the end. I thought maybe it was all over, or maybe I was just asleep. Either way, clung to the routine with both hands, like someone holding their breath underwater and hoping the world won't notice. Then, a month later, the arrived. There was no noise when I received it, no special sound. Just the creak of the gate slamming in the wind and the rustling of leaves on ground in front. When I opened the door to get the newspaper, an old avice of those who had worked for years on patrol, it was there, white, no stamp, no sender. No, just my name, in tiny, almost shy letters. My blood ran cold before I even touched the paper. I had felt it before. That feeling that the entire was holding its breath again. I picked up the envelope carefully, like someone picking up a piece of evidence from a scene. I went back inside, locked the door, and turned off the radio. The world suddenly seemed to silence. Inside there were 3 leaves. In the first, a short typed message. The cycle doesn't end. It just turns. And it turns for you. On the second, a list of names, similar to the one they gave me at the police station, but with fewer names this time. 10. At all unknown except one. The last one, the last line, handwritten, shaky, as if written by someone afraid or in a hurry. My name, Daniel Almeida. On 3rd page, a symbol, one I already knew. One I had seen drawn in charcoal on the walls of Sophia's room, stamped on the guardians' masks. Scribbled the last pages of the diary, the circle with the 4 lines crossing the center, the symbol of the cycle. I sat up in bed, the paper in my hand, but this time it wasn't ordinary fear. It was something deeper, the knowledge that I was no longer an observer of history. Now was part of it. Maybe I always had been. Maybe it had all been built to bring me here. And now that Clara was safe, or at least far away, I was what was missing. I took a deep breath. I took her journal from the metal box. The still smelled like the old house. The magnetic clasp held together with a soft, familiar click. I hadn't opened it in weeks. But now, for the time, I read it not as someone who needed to understand, but as someone who finally accepted. There were no answers there, but there was one that still haunted me, like a shadow behind my shoulder. The cycle is the price. The brand does not disappear. I closed the diary, took a blank sheet of paper, and I started writing, not because someone asked me to, but because maybe someone one day will need it. Like I needed, and there was no one. My hands wrote slowly, as if each word had a weight that the paper could barely support. My voice was no longer same, but it was still mine. And as I wrote, I imagined that someone one day might find it and understand. At the bottom of page, I wrote down what I needed to say, what I wished someone had told me earlier, what might not make sense now, but maybe one day will. If you're listening to this, promise me one thing: never ignore what seems impossible. Because the impossible has already me. If this story gave you goosebumps, made you rethink the silence around you, or reminded you of someone you give anything to protect, then it did its job. That's why it needed to be told. And now, you can make it reach more. A simple like or subscription here on the channel helps keep this cycle of stories alive. Like whispers that refuse to write the word in the comments cycle. That's it. Maybe those who are watching will also understand what this means. And you thought this story was intense. The next video will take you even deeper, an even older mystery, a truth that has been buried for too long. Already there on the screen, just keep reading, because there are things we need to know before they find us.